To predict the future, we need to first identify the trend. Prediction of future is actually just an extrapolation of an existing trend. When I was studying Jyotish, my teacher told me that there are six things that we can categorically never predict, at least as of the standings of the modern day astrologer. The six things that he defined were Jivan Mrityu, Jay Parajay, and Yash Upyash. Jivan Mrityu meaning life and death, Jay Parajay means victory and defeat, Yash Upyash means fame and defame. What it literally means is that we cannot pinpoint and determine the time of someone's death, nor can we do that for someone's birth, even if it is a planned birth. Similarly, we cannot be sure that for the endeavor that we take, will we be victorious or will we lose? For example, if someone has an ongoing court case, we cannot be sure if the outcome will necessarily be in favor of the native. And similarly, we cannot establish fame and defame. That is, for example, if I'm creating these videos on astrology, I cannot be sure if I'm going to be famous or I'm going to be embarrassed. So then, what is the point of studying Jyotish? The idea is basically that through Jyotish, which are the eyes of the Vedas, we are interacting on a day to day basis with the Creator. Jyotish has a unique perspective on not just the philosophical aspects of our life, but has a direct, tangible, visible, and a provable aspect which is as scientific as any other law of physics. Let me clarify with an example here. In the previous video, we learned about the houses. Here on the chart in front, you will see that the first house where the cursor is currently placed, where you will see the word AS written, and in some softwares you will see the word LA written. What it loosely or literally means is ascendant or the Lagna. As I had explained in the video earlier, this literally represents the person whose chart it is. Similarly, where number 2 is written, this is the second house or the house of wealth. Where number 3 is written, this is the third house or the house of communication. 4 is the fourth house or the house of happiness. And all the 12 houses have a certain significance which I had outlined earlier. The question is, how are these houses determined? I'm sorry. So here if you notice that what I have done is I have selected a date, 20th of April 2025, which is still yet to come, given that we are only on 26th of February 25. And I've selected a time, 6 a.m., for the city where I reside. The reason why I have selected this time is basically because sunrise on this date happens at 5:54 a.m. And this chart will be an easy chart for me to explain the points that I'm making ahead. Now, 20th of April 2025, if you all do not know, most astrology systems, whether it is Vedic or Western, have this date marked as Aries, which means any child born on this date, for example, be it Adolf Hitler or anyone you know, would be considered to be having an Aries sun sign. But what does an Aries sun sign mean? Aries sun sign means that sun is actually physically placed in the house of Aries. And how do we know that this sun is placed in the house of Aries? And the reason is because we can see the number 1 on the first house, which indicates that sun is present in the house of Aries. Similarly, if I were to ask you what would be the moon sign of the child who was born on this date, and you would simply look at where the moon is, and since moon is in the house of Sagittarius, that is the ninth house on this chart, we can safely say that this child has a Sagittarius moon sign. Now, if you remember, I told you that these 4 points on the chart where 1, 4, 7, and 10 are written, which in this chart corresponds to the first house, fourth house, seventh, and 10th house, represent the east, north, west, and south, respectively. Now you sorry. Now you will note that at 6 a.m., that is at the time of sunrise, the zodiac that is on the east is Aries. And therefore, you will see that this child will have Aries, which is ruled by Mars, Martian personality, and with an exalted sun in that house, we can safely say that the attitude of this child will be energetic, confident, pride, even dominating. But let's understand what happens a few hours later. So to do that, I simply click here on the rectification and add 2 hours. And here you will notice that the first house has now, it continues to remain. You will see where the ascendant is. The ascendant will always represent where the first house is, which means what is happening on the east. And there we will see that 2 hours later, Taurus is rising on the east. And at that point, we have Jupiter sitting with a strong Digbal in that particular house. And you will notice that 30 degrees has shifted the sun. Therefore, Aries from the first house has moved in the clockwise direction to the 12th house. So here now we can see that the first house, that is the person who is born, that is at time of 8 a.m. instead of the previously selected 6 a.m., you will notice that such a person who's also born on 20th of April 2025 in the city of Pune at 8 a.m., you will notice that this person is a Taurus ascendant. And we know that Taurus is the most resourceful zodiac that is there. And Taurus, compared to Aries, which is a fire sign, actually represents the stability and practicality of an earth sign. With a directionally strong Jupiter in the first house, this is likely chart of an individual who's going to pursue great wealth and achieve great academic success. This person will find great joy in investing because Sun represents the soul and this is in the house of investments. With a keen focus on fulfillment of all desires, because we now see 4 planets in the 11th house of the person marked by Pisces, where Venus would be exalted, forming a Neech Bhang Raj Yoga of sorts. If we change the time 2 hours later, you will now see that the ascendant, which is the first house, is now represented by the number 3. You will note that Jupiter continues to remain in Taurus for this period. In fact, Jupiter changes its sign only once every 12 and a half months. So Jupiter at 25 degrees Taurus is just maybe a few months away from changing its sign and coming to Mercury. Sun, however, stays for almost 30 days in each sign, which means that the 6-degree Sun indicates that most likely Sun arrived here on 14th of April. Now the same child, the same time, that is the date of 20th April, and now the time 2 hours later, we will notice that the child born is a Gemini ascendant. And the third house we have learned is the house of communication. Such a child would love to talk, would love to write, would love to express themselves. They are highly likely to be extremely witty. They're likely to be very good learners. And here we will see that such a child will focus on fulfillment of all of his desires through leadership roles, which means a group leader. Because we know that the third house for everyone represents our peers. In this manner, we will see that all the 12 zodiacs feature at least once within the 24 hours of the day. Therefore, Even if you're born on the 20th of April or any particular date, the time is very, very critical, because a shift of 2 hours will necessarily change the ascendant. And if someone's time has an inaccuracy of 2 hours or more, we can be sure that the ascendant of that particular chart is going to be wrong. And if the ascendant of the chart is wrong, we can be very certain that everything that we work on later will be incorrect. This issue is addressed in astrology through a process called birth time rectification. But that is not the scope of the session today. The idea of the session today was to tell you, or basically to go through how the first house, which we learned by setting up the time of 6 a.m., which I will select now. The first house can be represented by the number 1, which would imply Aries. If in the first house the number changes, for example, if I go back 2 hours, you will note that this house is represented by the number 12, which is Pisces. In other words, not just the date, the time of birth is extremely critical. And of course, one has to note that the degrees, that is the time zone in which you are at, structurally governs time, and therefore the location is also very critical. In this example, we will see that in the first house, which represents the body, we can see that the number chosen here is 12. And the lord of Pisces, that is 12, is Jupiter. Such a lord is now placed in the third house of enemy sign of Venus. This child is likely to be extremely hardworking. It is very clear because of the exalted planet in the first house. This is going to be a very hardworking chart, but also the chart will show tendencies of being extremely creative, because Pisces is the most intelligent yet very unfocused zodiac. So the assessment from what we had when Sun was in the first house, in the house of Aries, compared to having Pisces in the first house or Taurus in the first house, is so different even at the initial levels. Therefore, it is very critical to have the date, time, and place correctly assessed. It is also very critical to note that these houses are fixed and these numbers represent the zodiacs. In the subsequent videos, we will learn about how do we identify the 12 zodiacs and more information about them, so that we can gradually move towards analyzing these charts. I wish you all the best.